So, welcome to another episode of Tech Unhinged. It's a podcast where we kind of dive into the unfiltered reality of technology, innovation. I'm Ashar, and today we'll be exploring the journey of, navigating modern businesses by overcoming outdated technologies, and also how do we harness, or create certain data-driven insights. Joining me is Chris Gomez, CEO of Barrett Value Center. It's a global consultancy dedicated to transforming organizational culture through leadership trainings and assessments. Chris has over 26 years of experience in the business consultancy space, and we love to hear, invaluable insights from you on how this journey has been. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Why don't you tell me a little about yourself, about BBC, and what's your role been there?
So, I'm CEO and co-founder of Barrett Value Center, and we've been doing this for about 27 years now. And my educational training was actually in computer science. So it's kind of a bit of a career shift into organizational development throughout the kind of quarter of a century that we've been doing this. So I've kind of seen both the back office sides of things and then also the client
Right.
facing sides of things, and have, I think, a unique experience background in putting these two things together to make business kind of function well. So my role in the origins of our company really was around, there was three of us that started it. How do three people create a global consultancy, right? We can't be
Right.
all
Yeah.
around the world at the same time, so we had to leverage technology pretty heavily in order to kind of scale up on the consultancy side of things. And now we have, consultants around the world working with all kinds of organizations of every industry, shape, and size. Our stuff is in 65 plus languages. So,
Wow.
we rely on technology heavily.
All right. That's good to know. So that's funny. So I also have a engineering background, and I graduated, a couple of decades back. But I typically tell to people that by heart I'm an engineer, but by profession I've been everything else, right? So be it
Yeah.
sales, be it operations, be it the admin, be it whatever. So the past, almost 10, 12 odd years, but absolutely. And I think when you're building businesses, having this background of engineering, you tend to look at everything from a very process point of view, and you think in that way that, hey, if I do X, Y, and Z, how can I get to whatever I have to get to and everything. So that's good to know, and that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Kind of out of my degree was it's more about problem solving. I think if maybe your
Yeah,
experience might be similar, that computer science majors, we're the laziest people. We're looking for the efficient, quick solution, right?
yeah,
To solve the big complex problems. And so that's how I kind of pivoted into kind of more leadership and not non-technical role is, okay, well, how do I tap into that mentality, that thinking on understanding complex problems? How do you dissect them? And then how do you kind of implement solutions to navigate effective paths? Yeah.
so what inspired you to go into culture and those kind of transformations? I mean, transforming organizations from a cultural perspective.
It is a funny story. Now, I have to dust off a few brain cells to go way back to the origins of this. But the the feeling was, I was cutting my teeth in a consultancy in the United States, and the other two co-founders were also coming from consultancies. And this might be a similar experience to people listening to the podcast, is like when organizations are trying to quote unquote get better. The
Yeah,
traditional methods are, we're going to send you to a training, or we're going to reorganize, or we're going to institute a new process or a new widget or a new system or a new thing, right? To figure out. And we quickly realized the missing ingredient in that were people. Organizations are human centric. It's all
yeah,
about
that's
people.
true.
Until our AI overlords kind of take over, it's still about people. So
Yeah.
and so how do we kind of fill that space to not remove training, not remove systems and processes and reorganizations, but support them better through culture and values. And so
Yeah.
that's the market that we kind of pioneered back in 1997
Wow.
um, to help organizations with that. And they've come, back in those days, they didn't talk about culture. They didn't talk about values. They talked about Six Sigma and, Agile came later and all those other kinds of great things. Now people understand leaderships, understand that, you have to work on your culture to make those things effective. Yeah.
So talking about culture, what do you think are the values that best represent BBC internally, right? So what is the culture at your organization?
We eat our own porridge, as we say. And so we do our own assessments and kind of do our own work because you can't sell what you don't have. And the the consistent set of values that I think that I have seen over the last 2 decades, humor, fun,
Yeah,
I think is both a personal
I
value and what we foster in the organization, because we do think we should have a good time. We work hard, but we enjoy each other's company. And the second one is also caring.
okay.
This is a relationship based business, and so caring is a common thread, and then making a difference, which is what the purpose of the organization is about. It's like, how do we change the philosophy of business at a global level? How do we help organizations not just be a great place to work, not just be a high performing organization, and not just, thinking about what's their legacy and impact on society, but all those things together. So those are the
Yeah,
driving values.
yeah, absolutely. I think and culture can be the biggest impact factor that you can put in any organization, be it 50 people, be it 5,000 people. Because once you fix that from the ground up, any hirings you do, any other people that join you, they all kind of live, breathe the same air, and it just becomes a tradition of sorts, or a culture of sorts where the growth automatically then starts up. So yeah, that's
It is like it is. It's a human-centered business, right?
correct,
We're
correct.
people. We all have needs, and we all have kind of ambitions and motivations. We also have all of our learning edges and our blind spots, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so when we take the opportunity to look at those, what are our strengths? What are our blind spots? Where do we want to grow and evolve, both personally and professionally, right? And we can harness that and align it. That's
correct.
where you see high-performing teams, high-performing organizations
Yeah,
where you're not paying attention to those things. You can sense it when you walk into the room. Oh, there's some dysfunction here, right?
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
that's a loss of productivity. That's a
yeah,
loss of efficiency. It's a loss of profits or margin, right? If you let
yeah,
it get out of hand.
yeah,
So it's a really impactful and important component to business that I think a lot of leaders are getting to now. Um, and if you look at the headlines, it's kind of the fundamental golden thread through most of the challenges that leaders are facing, like the return to office or remote
yeah,
work state.
yeah,
They say it's about productivity, but the underlying thing is what's the culture? Because both sides of the argument have seen success in the office and also remote. So what's the underlying thing? It's not the location. What is it?
what is it?
How do you build the culture to support whatever decision it is that you wish to implement that best serves the strategy of your business, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And that's the missing piece of that conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes sense. I mean, and one of the things that I've seen one of the things that come up is a lot of times people are able to define certain values. They would say we need to have integrity, we should have trust, but they often lack in outlining that, hey, what do you mean when you say have integrity? I mean, everybody wants to have integrity, right? So they had the case in point, the Lehman Brothers had the, like, written on their wall, and but right. So I think a lot of
Yeah.
times organizations really have to understand that, hey, if I'm counting or putting this as something on a wall, what does it mean from a behavior standpoint point of view? What does it mean to read it? And this book by, I think, the Culture Code by, I think, Netflix CEO that also, they also define these things, that it's the behaviors that eventually when they come together, that define that value. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we often see, unfortunately, there are organizations and leaders that, just like there's greenwashing, kind of culture washing. So we're going to
yeah,
put these really wonderful words up on the lobby wall that says that we're all about us, but it's PR, it's fiction, right?
yeah,
Um, and so part of what we do is like we kind of, assess, what's the reality? What is it like when you walk into the room? versus what you're kind of, and does it line up to what you're saying, right? And then the gap analysis is also quite revealing, where the leadership team might be thinking, oh, well, we're all of this. But then when you work with staff and you say, well, tell us about,
Oh, yeah.
your experience here, and it's a very different story,
And it's a
you know,
huge gap.
the huge gap, where's the misalignment? Where's the lack of communication, or where's the disconnect in this?
Correct.
Because that's often going to manifest itself symptomatically in other things of like inefficiency or bureaucracy, or people making afraid to make mistakes because there's different sets of expectations. That's not healthy for any type of organization
That's true.
operate in. So yeah, we see a lot of the kind of culture washing, and as you say, it's like when I see kind of in integrity, I think it's an important value, sure, and it's fine. I want us to have integrity just as much, but what's our unique fingerprint, right? What's
Correct.
our specialness in terms of how we want to create the culture of how we want to get things done. And so that's to me the that's not the competitive advantage, it's the sustainable advantage for organizations.
That's true. And I think it can become a competitive advantage as well. I mean, why not? So if it is it's an organization that's really aligned and everybody knows it, it automatically should get to that stage where they want to get to, at least because they're enabling the people and everybody. So that's good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you mentioned you actually did computer science graduate and everything. So I can say that you were the one of the initial people who built your software, the entire technology. So what was that experience about? And how quickly was it a one man, sitting down doing nighters all day, all night, or what was the.
I don't think we were quite in a garage as the kind of famous tech stories are, but we were in a basement, or I was in a basement at least. Um, and yeah, it was put together with duct tape, hopes, and dreams. I mean, just kind of take a time machine back to the late 90s and in the concept of what the internet was and how we were trying to leverage this new technology to reach customers around. One of our first customers, and we're in the United States, was a multinational in Europe. And so how do
Nice.
so you could do the traditional surveys where you print out boxes of surveys and you ship them and then people do them and you bring them back. We three people, we're not operating in that way, right? So how do we leverage? So I think the first assessment I wrote was a Perl script that dumped assessment data into a text file because there were no databases. I mean, the internet was the wild, wild west. Most
Okay.
people thought AOL was the internet, right? Chat rooms.
Chat
Um,
room. MIRC,
and
MSN.
yeah, right. You remember those
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
And and I wrote kind of there was no kind of software as a service layer, so everything was downloaded to a desktop. Where I put together a very rudimentary initial system to process that data that we collect, and then to try and figure out how do we create outputs. All of it was very new in terms of like soup to nuts of data collection, processing, analytic report outputs. Compared to what we can do today, it's
Yeah.
it's it's a completely different world. But a lot of it was just a lot of ingenuity, a lot of trying, a lot of experimenting. I mean, there weren't books because people were making it up on the fly.
All right. So, started from a Perl script, then I'm guessing then as time evolved, it went into a Windows software and kind of built together that. So it was all you also, or you then, part of a team or
Well, yeah, so I was just smart enough to know I need to hire smarter people. And so I've been blessed to have a really great team. And then when we eventually found you guys to add you to our group to help us out to be even greater. But yeah, it kind of progressed into we were working in a Unix environment, at least on the server side of things. And then um, yeah, then kind of Java, kind of
and based
started
and
to
all
take
of that.
root and
Yeah.
started to mature to
Yeah.
to where it was more than a kind of a gimmicky fun thing to do, and you could start to put enterprise solutions together. And so
Right.
that's when we really kind of leveraged technology because it went from a kind of a client server architecture to more of a software as a service,
Mm.
because we are all remote. So remote work is not a new thing for us post COVID. I've been working remote for 27 years, and so we have people scattered across the United States and then also a couple of people in the UK. So having a distributed architecture has always been part of our kind of core
DNA.
system.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. Oh, okay,
yeah.
that's nice. So
So
how did you
yeah,
guys used to do conference calls before Zoom and WebEx and Cisco?
I have to say
Really?
it was we were one of the first early adopters of Skype back
Skype?
when that was
Okay.
a thing. All right, so I'm probably
Okay.
showing my age. Hopefully someone on the podcast knows what Skype is. Um, and yeah, that was kind of our early video
Interesting.
conferencing kind of app. And
Interesting.
yeah, before then, I mean, I still remember the days when we had to travel, taking the list of dial-up numbers of the city I'm going to be in, you know?
Wow.
Yeah,
All
that's not
right.
the problem anymore.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I'm just showing my age here. Everyone's like, "Where's the dial-up?" Right?
No, I know dial-up. I've been through dial-up. So it's fine. I've been through dial-up. I've been through MIRCs. I've been through MSNs, and then Skype as well. The Skype isn't
Yeah,
that old. Skype is decent. I mean, Zoom did disrupt the industry, but Skype is decent, right? So
yeah,
you're good.
yeah, yeah. So, I
All
mean,
right.
again, the technologies, how we view technology is really as the enabling kind of foundation to allow us not only to kind of, it's not working remotely as a nice perk, but how do we find the right people that is for our business? And it's not constrained by a geographic circle of commuting time, right? So we
Yeah.
can find somebody in the U, we can find somebody, in any part of the US. And as we leverage the technology, both in communications for like Zoom calls, for example, or whatever people use, Microsoft Teams, um, and then also through the technical platforms by which we do work so that we don't have to be in the same shared physical space. We can be in
Yep.
the shared virtual space. And so that's to us a real kind of blessing and something that we really do appreciate, try and take advantage of because that helps our business. It's not just the nice, oh, I can kind of work from home, my commute's 30 seconds down the hall.
Yeah.
It's we can find the right people,
Yeah. That's
and
true.
that's really helpful for us.
Yeah.
Not to mention also, travel is reduced because I can have a meeting in the morning in London and a meeting in Sydney at night and work with a
Yeah.
client
Absolutely.
and not
No,
have to
that's
get
true.
on. Like, yeah.
That's true. You can really see the impact this kind of technology has made in the overall working. So I
Mhm.
know when we started a few years back, we had this old kind of slightly outdated technology system and that you were using. What kind of impact did you? I mean, how do you think did that? How did that impact your business at that time, and what prompted to you guys to think that hey, we kind of need to modernize it, take it to let's say newer technologies, newer, better user experiences, and everything? Well, what were the major points that
Yeah.
you felt that they were because of this technology or outdated technology?
Right. Right. So the platform that, you're helping us kind of, you know, revamp was our first initiative into a truly kind of software as a service, kind of a web platform.
Okay.
And so those were at the time very cutting edge technologies 15, 16, whatever years ago when we kind of launched it. I think it's maybe been longer than that now. What I have learned and through the process of kind of rebuilding the new system and kind of thinking about how we better manage this is kind of a concept that we have a phrase that we use like how do you boil a frog? You turn up the heat slowly, right? If you turn it up too fast, the frog jumps out. Well, from a
Yeah.
technology perspective, what we've learned is that we've kind of boiled our technology slowly, allowing forget what the technical term that you guys often use, technical debt.
Yeah.
We build as we build functionality or technology evolves. We kept the same system for a very long time. We've got our money's worth out of that for sure. But the price that we've paid is because we've gotten used to the workaround. We got used to it being a little slower because it's happened gradually over time. If you were to look at it as a fresh perspective, going, wow, there are lots of workarounds, there are lots of inefficiencies, there's some slowness now in the system versus what it was. That would be unacceptable. But we got used to it. So we kind of boiled the
Okay.
frog very slowly, technically, and got used to things that we probably should not have tolerated a little bit longer. So now we're paying a little bit more attention to
To
that
those
to
kind
say,
of things.
wait a second, don't ask the question, hey, is it working? Ask the question like, what are there workarounds? Are there inefficiencies? Are there things that you're doing that, you know, if we eliminate it, would it make your day quicker, more efficient, effective, easier?
So it kind of boils down to how your team and your employees kind of have that experience using the software. So a lot of times,
Yeah.
maybe when you go down, you talk to somebody and say, "Hey, I have to do that X thing," and he or she that person describes a series of steps, and you're thinking, "Wow, so it takes you about 6 hours, 8 hours just to get this done, and why didn't you raise this or something?" And they're like, "We just figured out a way to solve it."
Yeah.
So
I
that's
have a
the
story I
right.
remember, and I tell this. There was um, this was a few years ago, and we had a calendar kind of process to organize some scheduling for client engagements. And um, one of the people that worked here, she said, "Oh, by the way, could you take a look at this because it wasn't working for some reason or and whatever." I was like, "Oh yeah, no problem." Took maybe 5 minutes to do some reconfiguration to reconnect something, and like, oh, here it goes. And I'm like, how long have you been like, it's not
Mhm.
worked? Oh, I figured out a way to do it manually. It hasn't worked for like 10 months, but I haven't been bothered. I didn't want to bother anybody, because I had a workaround, but since you were here, I thought I'd ask. So that was a real kind of vibe. Like,
I
I
hope
wish you
not.
had asked 10 months ago, what could I have saved you in time?
Yeah, imagine
That's a
that, right?
conversation that we often try and have. Again, it's not does things work or you have a workaround. It's, are we working effectively? Are we efficient in this? Are there ways for us to improve not just your productivity so I can squeeze more work out of you, but there's stuff that we shouldn't have to
Yeah,
tolerate,
yeah.
right?
I mean, it just
Right.
gives you time to think, right? So it's not necessarily that, hey, I'm really counting the hours. It's more like, okay, this is done. You have like 3, 4 hours. So you have some extra time to think on, hey, what can I do to learn more, do something better? And just frees up your mind, right? So I think that's the goal.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever face issues serving your clients with an older tech, or that didn't impact
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot? Okay.
We got a little bit into that as well. That's Yeah, it's so in the industry that we are in, it's not, I wouldn't say it's not considered a technical industry in terms of like you have the shiny newest app, the shiny, technical
Yeah.
widget. We're on the people side, we're on the softer kind of working and through culture sides of things. So we had a mindset for a little while in terms of, well, we can kind of get away with not having the latest and greatest shiny system. Um, and again, we let that slip. It was true to a certain degree because that's not the main selling point. But there are expectations of functionality, of presentation, of ease of use, of, oh, I should be able to log in. I mean, how many organizations do we interface now that don't have some type of login portal where you can check your account if
Yeah.
nothing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there are expectations in the marketplace that we are now also having conversations like, what are the expectations? We don't have to be leading edge of, we don't have to have VR goggles, right? That's not our
Right.
business. And we need to have a way of that customers can get the information they need quickly and effectively,
Right.
an interface that's intuitive and modern and easy to use. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
small
those are
things like,
those are conversations. Yeah.
yeah, and small things like, hey, I don't need to create another account and then remember the password versus it kind of gets connected with your one place, one sign on. And these are very small things that kind of add to the overall setup as well. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
true.
when that kind of speaks to this technical kind of creep that over time we've Frankensteined all these different systems that you guys have helped us unfrankenstein,
Yeah.
um, where we did have a couple of different logins because we just kind of built these siloed things. and customers expect a more seamless experience now.
Service experience. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
so
That's correct.
we learned a lesson in that.
No, that's actually how you evolve. I think a lot of the frog example is actually perfectly beautifully put. If you wait too long, it's also a problem. If you do it too fast, it's also a problem. So you need to kind of find the right balance, the right temperature, how
Mhm.
much you can do and how, because this is, it's not a small transition from, because people are so used to using the old system. And I know it took us a lot of time to actually convince them that, hey, and it was more of a like, we're shutting down the old system. You have literally no other choice just to, start using the new system. So that also kind of is a transition in its own self. So let's say by contrast, if you imagine, and I know when you have legacy with legacy systems, a lot of problem is also not only technical debt, outdated UI, and like, overall experience lacking, but a lot of problem from the data side as well, because you have these individual silos which have data which kind of do not talk with each other, so you can never really have a look at true picture. So what, I mean, now considering where we are, what kind of impact do you think that this data consolidation or being able, and with AI also coming in, and we'll talk about it a little bit further down, how do you think that kind of impacts the overall org? How does that help, right? So that's also a very big case of deciding to kind of transition from a legacy to more modern systems.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, when thinking about this, and then I think we're in a period of human history where there's a kind of exponentially increasing amount of data thrown at people. We're not an information age anymore. It's an information overload age.
I agree.
And
Yeah.
it's coming from all kinds of sources. So there are two kind of main tent poles that I think are important in considering this complex situation. One is trusting the data, right? And I'm not talking about misinformation trusting. I'm talking about you're coming from different sources. What's the veracity behind it? Is it
Mm.
timely? Is it accurate? You know, you have different parts of your organization adding inputs in different systems. Where do you trust that as the source of truth, right?
That's
That's
true.
a conversation. That's the conversation we've had in our organization where it's maybe come from a customer team as well. They might have some information on a client engagement versus sales or marketing or something else. Where's that source of truth? Where's the trust around it? So when we build and integrate the things, that's got to be built in to foster that trust so that when I'm looking at the screen, I'm looking at the
Is
data.
it the right thinking? Yes.
Yeah, it's not some story being told, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then the second thing is, what's the information that's not interesting? I want the information that's useful. And that's
Yes.
another conversation that we have. There's lots of information I've seen thrown around, like that's interesting. It's not useful.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, it's good to know, but what do I really do with it? I mean, okay, it's a fun
there's so
stat.
much information.
Yeah.
I don't have time for
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
need useful. I need
Yeah.
what's going to be actionable, what's going to be help us making decisions, execute on our strategy. And to discern the difference between useful information and interesting information is an important conversation.
Yeah.
And there's different levels of usefulness within your organization. So, the data sets that I need to see might be for a specific kind of context versus like my marketing director, or my IT guys in terms of like how the systems are running. But I often see in conversations or in meetings people bringing interesting, oh, we had this much engagement. I'm like, that's nice, but why? What's the context? What's the reason around it? How do we connect and how do we promote that information as part of the system design is an important conversation.
A lot of times when you actually get the right picture and you look at useful data, there's a lot of strategic thinking that happens, right? So it kind of, there's this, it opens your mind to, oh, okay, this is something that I probably didn't know ever, and now you all of a sudden you have all these ideas coming in, and you're able to strategically think that what do I do, and how do I move forward, what are the next 12 months look like. I
Right.
mean, we were when we looked at our, I had this problem of having the right data every time I opened up, our data, and I was like, this doesn't look like, right? So you had to go back and then you had to do those manual counting and then you should come back and then we build the system around. And there were a lot of
Hmm.
things that, oh, we've all of a sudden we realized we've done a lot of these kind of projects. So, and that's a revelation and, you start moving towards that. So that definitely helps.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do you think, what kind of, I know, and with you guys, I believe data is actually everything because based on that, you figure out that, hey, how big or small of a gap is between what the stakeholders want and what the employee really thinks the culture is.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
so kind of the corollary to is it useful? Is to what degree is it accurate, not from a trust perspective, but from a completeness perspective, so that it is actionable. And so we also the other phrase that I like to use is like there are sometimes the data we need to be accurate enough to land on the moon. So we need precision because it's
Yeah.
critical. And there's data
Yeah.
that's like I just need to be able to describe the moon. And so
Yeah.
to understand the difference, so that we don't get caught up and everything has to be to like 5 decimal points, which
Yeah.
can bog you down. Sometimes I do need 5 decimal points, or I do
Correct.
need a level of accuracy and completeness. And sometimes it's like that's not necessary in this context, and to know the difference between the two. So working
Yeah.
with customers, gotta trust it, right? It has to be useful. There's the level of completeness and accuracy because we're giving them recommendations that are impacting their business, right? But there are
Yeah.
going to be some contexts where it's like, no, we just need the general trend or the general kind of indicator towards something to get a sense. Less
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. No, I love you bring up a quote. So there's something that I like to use in my org, and I usually say to people, "Hey, in God we trust. Rest all others bring data."
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it, right? So absolutely. Uh, I mean, so yeah. So I think with data does become a critical point. So just
Yeah.
wondering, and I actually wanted to ask this before, but it just came to my mind. What was the turning point where you guys kind of decided that, hey, we need to modernize this, we need to update our technology? Is any incident happened, or it was a series of incidents, or was there a special turning point, or it was just over time just
Um,
thinking,
that's a really great question. I don't think there was a true kind of aha moment or meeting. I think my natural DNA is how can we continue to be better? How can we continue to kind of meet the needs of our customers? And so that's always kind of a driving focus for me to look at the periphery, to look at the horizon and try and understand the tension between what we have works and then what we could do to make things better for our stakeholders. So
hmm,
for us, we never got caught up in the app world. It just didn't fit our business. Everybody and their brother was coming up with an app for their company. And I saw some
yeah,
great apps, and I saw some apps that are like, I don't know why you would build this,
yeah,
except for
yeah,
someone asks you, do you have an app? You get to say yes.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, okay,
So we never went that route. It never fit our model. There was no customer driving need behind it. So I think for us, it's more of what are our customer expectations? What's that next thing that might make them go, wow, this is neat. Thank you for doing that. Or this is giving me better insights into the operations of my business, or allows us to respond quicker.
so there were actual use cases that, I mean, you noticed over time, and you can, because a lot of times business, so your core business might be something else, but it primarily to deliver that successfully, it's very dependent or highly dependent on the technology stacks. And one of the problems that I've seen in a lot of organizations, they don't tend to find people who can actually support the software as well. So, you wouldn't find a lot of COBOL developers or classic ASP guys who are willing to work on such when there's so much newer technology, and you ask them that, hey, you don't find good talent in those spaces. So that I've also seen that as a pivoting kind of realization for organizations that, hey, I'm finding it hard to find talent, and all I have is one or two people who are as old probably as the software. So
Yeah.
that danger is also there. So, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I
so
mean,
that's
unfortunately,
also
I could I could confess the fact that I have programmed in COBOL, so I could be one of those dinosaurs roaming around doing that kind of work. But that's an important piece. Is like if technology is evolving,
Yeah,
and it's a delicate balance. You don't want to be on the bleeding edge and investing in something that's not ready for enterprise, and you don't want to be left behind in terms of like, yeah, this is going to be too expensive to maintain.
yeah,
You know, and there's a not to throw any kind of particular company under a bus, but there was an airline that hit some weather issues, and they're known for being their culture is kind of a leading brand proposition for them. They're very famously known for being the fun airlines to fly and all that. There was a weather event that threw their reservation systems and some certain things out of whack, and it took them a week to recover because their
wow,
old IT systems, right, were siloed and not connected and weren't efficient and weren't so they paid a huge price. They are the darlings of culture, which is in our industry, so that's how it's more top of mind for me. They're always the poster child of, hey, look at the culture of this organization. It's great. It is, you know great. We really applaud what they do there, and they've maybe neglected, made choices
good
around how they
choices.
want to keep
Yeah,
their infrastructure up to some type of industry, not standard, but modernization to handle the
true.
complexities of a major weather event that threw things out of whack. And they paid the price for that,
Yeah, yeah.
both in customer loyalty, both in penalties from
The
regulatory agencies,
brand reputation is
brand.
very, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So I think that has to be part of that conversation of, yes, we want to obviously promote a brand of being a great airline to fly. You can trust us and all those great culture things. But the underlying thing is, well, hopefully they
and,
keep up with mechanical,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And
But then
the next,
also their IT, their
yeah.
reservation systems and their routing of their pilots and their flight attendants. Yeah.
So what kind of advice you yourself going through this entire transition? What do you think? What kind of advice would you like to give to, let's say, other business leaders that, hey, who are kind of struggling with the transition and making the decision? What could help them? How could they frame the thought in their head?
Kind of reflecting on our experience at BBC and thinking about your question, and when you're looking at these larger systems, especially the legacy ones, and I'm going to go back 30 years when I was working on mainframe COBOL systems, which I know are still working,
Yeah,
right? They're still, because they're
they
so
are.
monolithic, they're so embedded in the agencies. They look at like, what's the cost of making these shifts? The disruption is going to impact my short-term results. And I think that's a dilemma that a lot of executives face. And I think the problem is that the change doesn't happen until disaster, as with anything in life, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, in your personal life or leading an organization. And I think the discipline really comes down to, it's like, I have to think long term. Yeah, there's going to be maybe some short term pain in doing this. Any change is going to never go 100% smoothly. There's going to be some short term challenge in this and expense, but you have to balance the long term success against that. And I think that's often the challenge of senior executives when they have short term result pressures. They keep kicking that can down the road. And can you have the honest conversations with your shareholders, your board, or whomever you're working with to say, I know it's working now, but it's been a while since we've done something in this.
Right.
How do we mitigate so that we aren't in the news, right? So we
No,
keep our
that's
brand
true.
reputation so that we aren't fined if we're in a regulatory environment. Um,
Yeah.
so that maybe our maintenance costs will be cheaper down the road because we're not having to
Yeah.
hire the super specialty people that only work on this technology anymore. I'm a hammer salesman, so everything's a nail. It goes back to culture. Like, what's the culture of that executive team, of that management team?
So what were the, let's say, the biggest challenges that you felt you faced or during this transitioning from a legacy to a modern system? What were the top two, three things that come to your mind?
So none of these challenges were new. And I was even speaking to um, someone earlier this week saying, going, okay, here's where we are. I'm like, I'm okay. We know this is a process, right? So one of the bigger things is you get used to the way things were done and you bring
Yeah.
in something new. Now you have to learn the new thing.
Yeah. You have to first
So that's,
unlearn and then, yeah.
and so you often hear the phrase, well, it didn't work like that in the old system. You're right. That's why it's called the old system. We're doing something hopefully more efficient, something maybe that the customer is going to help, or maybe if you try this and look at a different way, maybe this is better for you or your team. So there's the old way of doing things versus the new way of doing things, challenge, the change management process. Nothing new
Okay.
in that regard.
Right.
And so I think it's important sometimes in those conversations to kind of zoom out and just recognize for what it is, as opposed to getting caught up in the emotion of that. And so we know change is difficult for some more than others, but this is where we're going and how can we make that smoother? So I think that's the biggest issue. Um, I think the other one too, and this depends upon the size of your organization, is building it while operating the old and
Yeah.
managing two
Yeah.
priorities. So, we have a smaller kind of internal team that's, doing kind of both. And so they're juggling two different types of priorities, running the old, which is serving the customers and running the business and operations, but then also contributing to the design or the user acceptance or the, whatever part of the plan of the new
Right.
and not slowing that down. And so
Yeah.
there's a tension in that, and there's no answer. I mean, if someone has an answer, let's write the book and, please, I'd like to be a part of that because that's the magic button,
Yeah.
right? But in my
Right. Right.
experience, you have to manage that tension.
Correct.
And again, that takes some, in my experience, it's better handled if you can kind of step back a little bit and not always get caught up into the details. Yes, the details are important, but from a managing the project perspective to understand that tension is going to exist, and there are times when we're going to get it right, and there are times when we're not going to get it right. But that's part of the process. So those are
Right.
probably off the top of my head the
Right.
two universal ones that I know we've always seen.
So, right. So, I mean, it's just to summarize, it's basically the challenge of making sure that our people start using the new software and get comfortable with that. So it's basically change management, right? So you have to
It's
get
it's
comfortable.
it's we're
It's a,
human
yeah,
beings.
right.
We're
So
comfortable.
right. So yeah, yeah. So it's more like, hey, I have to get used to it. It's understanding that's the change. And I think that's absolutely right. A lot of, I mean, I do know for a fact that we had to write these scripts where we could update data from older system to the new system because there were still two groups of people using it. And then when they used to go to the new one, they were like, we don't have our data over here, so we can't use it. We're going back on. And we had to, solve this problem. That now you have your data, so you don't have any excuse to go back. So yeah,
It makes sense when you think of like the stories of the old explorers that went across the Atlantic. They would burn the ships when they got to the beach. We're not going back.
no, so all right. So moving on to and I think no podcast can be complete without talking about the new kid on the block, AI in general, right? So,
Right.
what's your thought on that? What's your thoughts on the future of AI technology? How do you see that coming into play? And yeah,
Yeah, yeah. No, that is the new kid on the block, and I think I mentioned earlier around the fad versus where's the trend or the kind of general
right,
direction. Whereas we didn't feel an app was in our business model or something appropriate for us, AI is a different technology. And so we're looking at that very closely. And I think our challenge right now is identifying the right, not just the right window of maturity of the technology, because it is advancing so quickly and we don't want to be ahead of the wave and we don't want to be behind it, right? We want to figure out where it fits for us and our customers and our internal stakeholders. And then, two is like, how do we leverage it appropriately? So both from a perspective of like, where does it fit our business model? we can use it for very simple things of like help me write, memos or emails or papers or things to help me analyze data, right?
Right.
But it has to be that again, do we trust it? Is it reliable in terms of its accuracy? Is it hallucinating? And all the things that we know in a quickly evolving technology, we have to weigh in, okay, I use it for helping me write papers and certain things. Um, I've even asked when we do kind of videos or we do interviews, I've had it actually help interview me to create content, which I think is a really kind of a neat concept, right? If I'm stuck on a block, I'll ask it to interview me to pull out the information. But then I use it and I massage it and I work it and I verify the material. Where we're still evaluating is the reliability using it in a customer setting
Hmm.
where we're giving advice to very serious people making serious decisions. We want it to be accurate. It's got to be that 5 decimal places of reliable, right? Um, and so that's where we're like, all right, how do we want to weave this in? We'll use it, get used to it. What's our policy? Is it, a lot of people say, oh, my AI overlords are going to replace me. Our position, our policy here at BVC is no, it's to supplement your work so that you can do the more fun stuff. Like no one enjoys writing a memo or a paper of some variety. If it can do 80% of that for you, you get to do the fun other things.
Right.
So how does it
Right.
make your day easier and better? How can you better make that difference? Going back to our culture, how can we maintain, that sense of caring for each other? We're not looking to have robots replace people because we're in a people business. How does it help us
Right.
execute in a business?
Right.
So there are lots of different vectors that we evaluated on, and I know I use it, and certain members of my team, use it from a research or kind of a authoring perspective, some testing of the waters from an analytical perspective. And, for us, when we find that right mix, then we'll embed it a little bit more into some of the client-facing product stuff when we feel that it's going to offer the right reliability and truth because our brand and our reputation is paramount
Right.
in the work that we do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you absolutely nailed it. And I think I 100% agree with you that it's not going to replace people or it's not to replace programmers or analytics or consultants or whoever it is. It's really it's an assistant that's
Mhm.
on 24/7, that doesn't get tired, that has a much, you know, greater span of thinking. But at the end of the day, it's an assistant that I have to rein in, like you would put it on a horse and just have it
Yeah.
focused, and you have to review what output it produces. So that's I think that's going to be the critical thing. The other thing, and when I was playing around with it, what I noticed was that the amount of information that it can process and give you as a human, it's very hard to process. I mean, if you're writing a paper of 5,000 words, you get to it step by step or stage by stage, right? So you think of the
Mhm.
outline, you think of the first 1,000, 2,000 analytic words, then you arrive at a certain conclusion that, hey, this is what I feel like that the culture is, and whatever, and you take your time in getting that conclusion. If you rely on AI, it just spits out the output in 3 minutes, and then you still have to spend 2 days to absorb all of that information, right? So because you're not as
Right.
fast as the so
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's where it's headed towards. Though I do get scary, I haven't. I mean, I often tell to say this to people that I haven't watched a good AI movie. Right, so all of the movies are bad AI. AI end up ruling the world, destroying the world, concluding that humans are all bad. So, but that's
Yeah. 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 I mean, for us, where I think we kind of try and leverage it more is what you talked about is because there's a complexity of information and the volume of information. My experience in how it kind of helps my day is simplifying and theming and making sense of the patterns within that volume of information, where the human brain just cannot get its kind of virtual arms around that. and to leverage technology to help you with that. So it's a supplement to who I am and who we are versus a replacement.
Yeah, that's true.
That's to me where I see the future, and hopefully it's not so aware that it doesn't require us.
So I'd like to kind of, before I wrap up, I'd love to hear if there's any final, advice or thing that you would like to add, or a comment or anything on organizations that want to, let's say, modernize their culture
Hmm.
and or technology, and from both perspectives, and then we can kind of wrap up from there.
Wow, that's a big invitation. So I guess the best I have it in the spur of the moment, kind of, is this, you know, when thinking about your organization, at least from the lens we like to think about is, it is organizations are human centric. It's people. You take the people out of it, there's nothing there yet, right?
Right,
So when you're thinking about technology, who are the stakeholders in that system? And then how can you leverage that technology to create that better day for that stakeholder, right?
right,
Um, and that's the end of it. I think there's a lot of conversation that sometimes it's like, oh, there's a new thing out. Let's do the new thing and find a reason to do it. To me, it's a little bit backwards. Like, what's the need? How can we make the lives of our staff better? Oh, here's a technology that can help us, leverage that. Versus here's a technology. How do we squeeze it into our organization because it's cool or it's trending, right?
right.
So that's, I guess, I'm not saying I'm in a position to offer anyone advice, except for this is my experience and how we think about technology and leveraging it in BBC.
Right. Right. So yeah, so don't go to the gold rush. Really think through how it impacts you. What is the use case? What do I need to invest in terms of time, money, people, everything, and then figure out and decide. And it's not that hard as it looks. The biggest change or the biggest thing is that we have to make sure that our team is part of that entire process. They're onboarded. They know it's changed, and yes, we have to get used to being a little uncomfortable, but being comfortable at the same time, right? So
Yeah,
being comfortable
exactly.
with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds good. All right. Okay. Thank you for your valuable insights. It was really fun talking, and good talking to you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks.